Do you know how to write UI tests in Xcode? I'm going to show you how to get started with it. So let's take a look at XCTest. Now, if you're on Xcode 15 or even Xcode 16, XCTest is the only way to write UI tests in Xcode right out of the gate without any third-party frameworks. Hey, what's up? This is Paul Solt from Super Easy Apps. Let's get started. So I'm going to show you how to get started with that. We can go ahead and run these tests just so that you can sort of see what will happen. Now, I'm testing a Mac application, so it's going to take over my whole screen. If you're testing an iPhone application, it's just going to run that on the iOS simulator. The code is pretty much the same, though I'm going to be doing a little bit of different testing here than you would maybe on an iPhone app, just to highlight a bug that I had in my own app. So I've got this app that I demonstrated on how to do a full screen notification. It's actually presenting a full screen notification, but the area around of it is transparent. And so I can click and it shouldn't go away. That's kind of the feature. But it does have a timeout in this demo, so it will time out after 10 seconds. If I want that to appear again, I can just click on this button and it will appear. Clicking on it should make it disappear. Depending on where you click, though, it may or may not work. And that's sort of related to the size of the UI component. And so having some tests that help track down these issues and make sure that it's actually going to close are really helpful. Okay, so let's dive into the starter project. I'm going to close this out. This is my demo project. And all of this source code is going to be available. So if you want to download any of the source code, I've got the demo project, which I just showed off. I've got the begin, which is a starting point for you, and then I've got the end. And the end is what I'm going to be working on today, and then I'll commit that change to my repository, and then you can go ahead and download it. Now, if you want any of this code, head on over to the link down below. That'll give you access to download the SwiftUI app code. That's for any of these SwiftUI tutorials. Now, this one's a little bit of a this is not really an iOS specific, but it's relevant. I'll probably have a specific iOS one coming up, but for right now, since I'm working on this Mac app, I thought I'd show you how to get started with it. All right. And if you want to see more about how this app works, I have another video. I'll link this one down below on how I actually made this full screen notification using NSPanel and Swift, wrapping that with SwiftUI. Okay, so let's open up the starter project. This is going to be it right here. So if I just go into, for you, you're going to open that begin. For me, I'm going to open up the end. Make sure I'm working in the right one. I'm not sure what that one was, so let's just double check. Yeah, we're in the end, and I'm in Xcode 16 beta. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with it. I'm just going to move this around, and maybe we'll keep it on this side of the screen. So what do we want to start with? Well, let's go ahead and run this version of the app. And if I tap this, we see the notification. If I tap on the label itself, it should dismiss. Tapping elsewhere is not going to make it dismiss. So that's like a bug that you could fix, or hitting that X should make it go away. So there's a couple different options for testing this. We want to be able to interact with this, and we need to show it, and then we need to get rid of it. So those are the two actions that we're going to work on today. And I'm just going to write two tests. But we're going to have to jump through some hoops to get these two tests to work. So let's go ahead and create our first test target. You're going to go up into the project navigator. Then you're going to go to where it says targets. This is going to be under, any one of these tabs. You should see this as long as this is not hidden. So we're looking for the targets, and there's a little plus button down here at the bottom of this section. We're going to click that, and you're going to type in test, and you're going to see two testing options. So if you want to do UI tests or unit testing, you can. Now, Xcode 16 will have the option for the new Swift testing. I'm not going to cover that. Swift testing is not available for UI tests. So as it currently stands, we're going to be using XCTest for any of our UI tests. So let's go ahead. It's going to propose a name based on the name of our app. It's not the best name. We've got test notification, and it's calling it test notification UI tests. But hopefully your project's named a little bit better than mine, which is just a demo project. And here I'm doing Swift. It's set up to my team. You're going to have to change these settings to get this to probably build on your machine. but you'll at least have the code, and you can just swap out profiles right here by setting your team or setting it to none. And you should be able to test this if you're a Apple developer. So once we do that, it's going to add a testing plan potentially, and it's going to add our UI tests. If we go ahead and run it with Command U or go up to debug or product and do test, you're going to see it's going to take over your screen, and we should see, apparently I have unit. Okay, that's weird. I have breakpoints, but I just created that. So they must have existed in my code repository. That's odd. So it's going to go through and it's going to do some launch testing by default. And then it's going to do, I think, a color test. I'll see it launch. Now it just switched everything to light mode, and then it switches it back. So it's doing all of these light, dark tests. And that's a lot of tests. And a lot of those aren't related to what we want to do. So we're going to go ahead and get rid of them. So this is testing the launch performance, which I guess is going through all of that stuff. I don't want any of that. So we're just going to go ahead and get rid of all of these and hit delete. And then I don't need any of the setup code right now except this one line because this defaults to true, and we need this to exit right away. If there's an error, you can get the quick help, and it will explain this a little bit more. Okay, so this is our starting point. We're going to create our own test, and I'm just going to call it test tap on notification dismisses it. So I like to be very verbose with these tests, and this gives us an entry point into the testing system. Now there's two ways that we can add we can sort of pre-record stuff. So if you've never created a UI test, it might be helpful to pre-record something. So I'm going to go ahead and show you that. So option 1 is to record UI test. And another option 2 is you can set a breakpoint and record after that breakpoint. This doesn't work as well for a Mac app. It's a little bit hard because it takes over the full screen. So option 1 is a little bit easier to test from scratch, but sometimes you want to get to a specific spot in your app and start recording for that. So we're going to go with option 1. And to get started, as long as you have a test method, it has to start with the word test in your XCTest case. If we click in here, it looks like I had to save it. This button down here in the debug area is going to show us to record UI test. So there's a couple, maybe that's what was throwing me off earlier. I was running into issues where I thought main actor was potentially disrupting it, which is why I didn't put it here, or if it was some kind of bug. But sometimes this button deactivates. So just make sure that you save the file with Command S, and let's record our first UI test. So here it's still working. It also probably depends on cursor selection, like being on an actual line of code. So I'm going to hit record. That's going to bring up the app. Now, any interaction that I do right now is going to be recorded, and this just gives us some starting point to work with. So if I click on this, it's going to show us some stuff. If I were to click here, it would show me something else. It's going to rearrange code and rewrite it as we're interacting. If I were to move this, it's probably going to do stuff. If I do that one more time and then I click again, you're going to see it's going to generate all of this code. And so sometimes this can be helpful, but sometimes this is not. So let's stop our recording, hitting that button again, and it should stop. And now we have these different options to choose what we want and if we want any of this code. So you can see it's grabbing the window and then it's trying to find the buttons on the window. So for a Mac app, you're going to have a little bit more, or I guess you would have the same type of thing if you had a iPad app and you had multiple screens. But we can simplify a lot of this. So this is a lot, but this is a good starting point. So if you don't know what you're doing, this is a quick way to go through, automate the selection of things. What we can actually do is we can clean this up so that it becomes a little bit more coherent. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce a variable at the top, and we're going to call it our application. So var app, XCUI application, and then I'm going to just make this an implicitly unwrapped optional. We're going to assign to it in this method. We're going to say app is equal to XCUI application, and go ahead and do this, and then app.launch. So this is what we're going to do on start. I guess what I could have done before we even do this, let's go ahead and run our unit test that we just recorded to see what happens. So it's going to run it. I didn't get rid of one of our tests. Hold on. I don't want any of these launch tests. So I'm just going to select this launch test and hit delete. We removed some of the other tests, but I didn't remove that one. So let's try this one more time. Command U, go ahead and run. We should see our application. That's going to run it. That's the wrong one. Command U. So let's stop that. Command U to run our UI test. So this failed to even start the application. Oh, did I get rid of the launch? Yeah, I probably messed this up. So let's go ahead and put this in. Just going to comment that out. That'll get the app to launch. And then we're going to see that it clicks around, does some different things. It's going to succeed because there's no condition that it's actually testing. Okay, so let's start to clean this up. And the other thing is that, like, when we look at some of these things, there could be two different things that it could select. And so this is where we're working with the accessibility system. And so if we want to look at any of this, if I were to set a breakpoint in here and we were just to run this, we could inspect and sort of see what's going on here. So if I do a PO and then app is going to show us what the app looks like from the accessibility point of view. And so what you're going to see is a ton of stuff here. It's going to show you your window. There's going to be identifiers that are set on some of these. There's going to be some labels set on some. And what we want to do as developers is have identifiers that are unique so that when we're testing, the contents of whatever's on the button title or whatever's in the label, if it's dynamic content, isn't going to break our unit or UI test. So those are things that we want to keep in mind. You can see the menu bars in here with a ton of stuff. All of this stuff has identifiers already. And so you can write unit test or UI tests that will work against those. All right, so that's a little bit on how you can sort of get an idea of what's available if you just PO the app, or you could do something like PO app.static texts, and this is going to show you any static text within your application. Okay, so now that we have that, let me just resume this. And you can see it's clicking around, moving around. I think it's actually moving my mouse sort of like I was moving it, which is interesting. Okay. So I'm going to have to make some changes to the app to make this more accessible. And we're going to do that in both the content view and the full screen notification. So first off, this show full screen button, I want to be able to have an accessibility identifier so that we can identify this. And we're going to use a property modifier here. So if we just do accessibility, there's going to be an identifier. If we start typing out accessibility identifier, you don't have to type the whole thing. You can do like AI, and that should start to match to this. So if we do that, we can go ahead and give this a easy to remember thing such as show notification, and that will give us a nice way to refer to this, and we can copy that string to use in our code. And so now when I want to go and show the notification, I'm not going to even worry about all these windows. I'm just going to say, well, that's going to break everything, but let's just comment all of this out. So you can sort of see what this is going to look like. I'm going to grab the app up top, and I'm going to say app.static texts, and then, or actually we're looking for buttons. So we're going to look for the buttons attribute, and we're going to say, okay, give me the show notification, and then we want to click that. So if we go ahead and run this test now, we should see it open up and it should start that. And that's all it does. Okay. So next I want to verify that tapping on the notification dismisses it. And so what we're going to do is the same type of thing. We need to expose the full screen notification label. Now this is AppKit code, so it's Swift code. And we're looking for a NS text field that has the message label. We want to be able to tap on this to make everything disappear. And so to get easy access to this, instead of using this label as our text, since this could change and break our tests, we want to add the identifier. So message label dot identifier, and we're going to see the set accessibility identifier. So this is going to look a little bit different on Mac than it will on iOS, but the same type of thing will apply there. And we can go in and give this a title, and we'll just call this the message label. And now what we can do in our UI test is we can say app.static texts message label dot click, and then to do verify the so we want to verify that it actually goes away. Okay, so by cleaning this up, moving application up here, setting it so that we're always launching that same application, and then clicking on these two buttons that we need, we got rid of a lot of the extra stuff here. Granted, we do have a couple extra clicks because I was just clicking on things, but you can see how by being a little bit more intentional, we can reduce the amount of code that we have here. So let's go ahead and try this. So I'm going to go ahead, click the little play button right here. That will run this specific UI test. And there it has disappeared. So now what we want to do is we want to verify that it has actually disappeared. And if you're on Xcode 15 and lower, you need to write specific code to do this that is not provided by default. But new this year in Xcode 16, you'll be able to take advantage of a new method called wait for non-existence. And that should allow us to write the same exact logic. Let's first start with how we could implement this in Xcode 15 and lower, and then we'll talk about Xcode 16 and newer. Okay, so I want to write something that can verify that this is going to disappear. And essentially, we want a method called wait to disappear on a UI element here. Now, all of these UI elements are going to be they're a XCUIElement. And so in order to interact with them, we can create an extension on the XCUIElement. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to right click here, and this is something that you could start creating a library of helper files for your own projects that would do something like this. So we're going to do XCUIElement, and then I'll call it additions or extension. And then in here, we're going to import XCTest. I'm going to extend XCUIElement. And what we want to do is we want to wait to disappear. So how is that going to work? Well, let's go ahead and start prototyping it out. We're going to want to call it wait to disappear. Let's make this a little bigger. And then in here, we're going to have a timeout. And then this is going to be a time interval, which is going to be in seconds. And we'll return a bool if it actually disappeared or not. Now, I don't always want to leverage this, so marking it as a discardable result could make it easier to use. And then let's go ahead and write this method. Now, to do this, we're going to need to use a predicate on the XCTNS predicate expectation. So let's open up the documentation, if I can get that to open. Okay, apparently I clicked the wrong button. And we're going to look up the XCTNS predicate. So this is part of XCTest. This allows you to do a NS predicate so that you can wait for something. Okay, so that's what we're going to use. And let's go ahead and write the predicate. So we're going to create a predicate, NS predicates. And then here we're going to use the format option. And we're going to say exists is equal to false and is hittable is equal to false. Okay, so these two things are going to be what we need to get this to work. We're going to have no parameters passed in. So that's going to be our predicate. Then we can create an expectation with XCTNS predicate expectation. And we'll use this second one here. We're going to pass in this predicate. And the object is going to be self. And then from here, let's get the result. And we can just say XCT, and then there's a waiter object that allows us to wait for the fulfillment of a group of expectations. This has some methods for us. So we're going to do .wait for, and then give it a timeout. So this method right here, so press enter. All we need is a array of expectations. We pass in our expectation, and then we can pass in our timeout. After that, we only need to return the result is equal to .completed for this XCT waiter result. So if we do that, we now have our very own wait to disappear method, and this is going to be for Xcode 15 and lower. Okay, build and run, see if that works. We're going to jump back over to our unit test, and we can verify that the notification goes away. So right in here, we can just say app.static text message label dot, and then we've got our wait to disappear. And then all we need to do is give it a timeout. And in this case, we'll give it 3 seconds. It's going to auto disappear after 10 seconds. So I don't want to wait too long. Otherwise, I'll make this UI test fail. That's something that you can disable. and it's going to say, okay, this thing is gone. All right, so this is for Xcode 15 and lower. The other thing that we can do here is I've got redundant code. And so this is where you can start thinking about, okay, how can I write this so that's going to be a little bit less redundant? And we can use some computed properties to do this. So I'm going to create a computed property for the show notification button. This is going to be an XCTest element. Sorry, it's XCUIElement. And what we can do is we can just copy in this. So cut this, paste this up here. And now we can just say show notification button. And then we can do the same thing for the next one. So var, this is going to be our message label. Could be our notification message label. Go ahead and do that. And we can cut this chunk of code and paste this up here. And now we can reference this with the notification message label. So that's making our code look a little bit cleaner and gives us a good starting point to write additional tests. And then we can replace this chunk of code with that notification message label. Now, the benefit of doing all of this is that later on as you're writing tests, if you ever need to update the accessibility identifier, or if that changes because product wants to move buttons around and the developer forgets to update it, there's usually just one place that you need to update than a million places because you now are referencing a variable. And so this was super helpful at GoPro. Okay, so if we go ahead and run our test, we should see that this should still work. Otherwise, we'll have to fix that issue. And there we go. We have our first test. Now, if you're on Xcode 16 and later, we can do a new API, and I think I can write it without making any other changes. But if we do the wait, you're going to see a wait for and a wait for non-existence. This one existed, I believe, but these two are new. And we can see that in the Xcode documentation. So I opened up the release notes for Xcode 16. They're right here. I saw this when I was reading through it. I was like, oh, that's cool. I just wrote this and they just added it in Xcode 16. So it's something that we could take advantage of. And so what those APIs look like are right here. You'll see there's a little beta tag on this. I don't actually know how to do the availability check for this specifically. So you might need to do it against like Xcode 15. No, sorry. macOS 15. I'm not exactly sure how to isolate this unless you switch over completely. Your whole team switches to Xcode 16. So that's what I'm a little shaky on. But know that this API is coming and it will be out once your team adopts Xcode 16. In the meantime, you can use the method we just wrote. Okay. So this is going to return false if the timeout expires while the element exists property equals true. And then the other one is this, which allows us to check against a key path. So you can see if a certain key path on an object that you're waiting for exists or is equal to something after a certain timeout. So those are two new ones. And I think the other one, wait for non-existence, is what we want to do. So wait for non-existent with timeout 3. And I think we could just comment this out and run our UI test one more time. And we see that that is successful. So that's writing your first UI test. That's cleaning it up. That's making it work on Xcode 16 if you have it. Just to make this a little bit more backward compatible, I'm just going to leave the Xcode 15 version test on, and we're going to move on to our next test. So our next test is to test, and this is the one test that I wanted to run. So when I run this application, I've had issues where I want it to dismiss when I click on it, but I also want it to not dismiss when I'm interacting with stuff. And I potentially want it to stay on screen for an extended period of time. And this kept breaking because there was one line of code in the full screen notification that if I set this to either true or false, it behaves totally different. So there's a third state for whatever reason. If you add this one line of code, ignores mouse events. So if I click this, clicking here, I can't click on anything. It's totally opaque input. It's eating all the input, so I can't click through. This will disappear after 10 seconds, so it'll go away, and now I can click. And if I set this to true, I had issues where other things weren't working properly when I was working with SwiftUI. So I just totally got rid of this line of code, and running it again, I can go through, I can click on the actual label here, and this will dismiss, not the empty area. That's a bug that you can fix. Or I can click on different things in the background and still interact while this is on screen. Okay, so I want to test that behavior because this is broken on me, and it made me scratch my head for a long time as I was just commenting out huge chunks of code in here, trying to figure out what line of code did I add that caused this problem. So I want to have a test that can automatically verify that this functionality is still working. In case I do break it, I can go in and I can fix it again. So let's go ahead and write a new test. We're going to call this test click through transparent region does not dismiss notification. Okay, I'm trying to be as explicit as possible so that when this does fail, you know exactly what went wrong. So for this, we're not going to bother recording. We sort of know how we can write tests. We understand some of the underpinnings at this point, so we can go ahead and write them. And so for this one, we're going to, again, click on the show notification button. So show notification button dot click, and then that's going to show our notification. And then I want to make sure that the label exists. So I'm going to say XCTest assert, and this will assert that the condition is true. So I can just do XCTest assert, and then notification message label dot exists. And up to this point, we should be able to run this test, and this should pass, except I have an extra function down here. So let's get rid of that. So let's try and run this by clicking on the diamond. Okay, our tests succeed, which is great. We know that the label exists. Now what I want to do is I want to tap outside the notification and verify it does not dismiss. Now this is a challenge because I don't think there's an API that's going to do this for us. So if I want to say notification message label dot tap, that's going to tap right on it. And there is a way to get a new coordinate and sort of tap that. And so in order to make this more reusable, rather than like writing a bunch of code here, let's make another method that's going to allow us to tap nearby. So I essentially want to say tap nearby and then pass it some kind of vector coordinate. Okay, so what would that look like? Let's go back to that helper addition that we added, and let's start writing a new one. So for this, tap nearby an element is what we want to start with. To do that, let's create a new function, and we'll call it tap nearby. And then I'm going to give it an offset, and we're going to use the CG vector as a two-dimensional vector to offset our tap location. Okay, to do this, we're we're going to use we're going to get a coordinate, and I'm going to call it a normalized coordinate. So we've got this coordinate with normalized offset that we saw a little bit ago. And I'm going to pass it this offset that we've just given it. Now, what I have observed, and I'm not an expert on this, but that the normalized at 0 appears to be the top left corner. And from here, what we're going to do is I'm going to get a new coordinate, and I'm going to take that normalized value, and I'm going to use that offset. Sorry, I typed this wrong. With offset. I do not want this offset here. We're going to change this. We're going to change this to .0. So no offset there. Maybe I can do this all in one go. Maybe. Yeah, that could have been probably a one-liner. Okay, and then we'll just tap on that coordinate. So this gives us a little helper. You can experiment with combining those if you want to try and simplify this a little bit. This worked, at least when I wrote my last test. So I believe that this is a good thing to try out. And if we go ahead and write this, I'm going to come back in here and we're going to create a CG vector. And we're going to give it an offset of 0 and then -100. And then let's go ahead and run this test. And we're expecting that this should pass. If it still exists. So let's add one more condition. We need to make sure that notification message label still exists. Okay, so we've done that step. Let's run it one more time. Run through these two tests. And you'll see it do the logic. Okay, now let's change that one line of code that I showed you that was breaking it, and let's see if this causes it to break. I think I actually have to change this to true. I think I interrupted that. Oh no, so it is behaving a little different. So you can see that it's breaking my other test right now, which is curious. And if we comment this out and we run it one more time, I think I might be checking it a little too soon in this bottom one. So we might need a delay before we actually check it. So the last thing that I will do I'm going to copy in one more thing just to see if my hunch is correct. Okay, so what I have here is an XC test case extension, and I want to wait for a certain duration. So I'm going to set an expectation. I'm going to start it at this time plus the duration, whatever you pass in seconds. Then we'll wait and we'll fulfill, and then we'll wait for that expectation for that timeout. So this is just a way to delay, and let's see if we use that. So wait for expectation. So let me just see if this changes our logic here. Whoops, don't want that. I want this wait for timeout. It's probably not the best name. So let's just wait for 1 second. And let's just run this test and see what happens. Test succeeds. And then if I come back in here, when this was false, and maybe it might, when I ran this, and I click on this button, and I click here, oh, I don't have an action to actually dismiss it. In my other app, I do have an action that will dismiss it. So let me bring that one up. So this behavior is different than my full project. So if I run my full project and I actually show the notification, if I click here, it dismisses. If I click here, it doesn't dismiss. But again, I ran into the bug, and this is why I have it. If I go into full screen notification and I uncomment, let's get rid of that, this. So I need a tap gesture to make this test actually fail. So if I bring this up, now clicking outside makes it disappear, which is not what I want. And that's just by setting that thing. It just messes something up. So coming back in here, we could wait 1 second and just verify. In this case, it's not going to fail because apparently I am not dismissing. But you can see these are the two tests that we're running. And that's a good starting point for you to get started with UI test. So I hope this was helpful. If you want access to all this code, I'm going to commit these changes and put them up on the link down below. So if you just click down there, you'll get this and you'll be able to download all of the code from today's video. Thanks for watching. I know this was a lot. There's a lot to sort of cover. Working with UI tests is a little bit tricky at times. and just making sure that your elements are exposed takes some awareness as a developer. So hopefully that you learned something with that. We learned how to sort of wrap up some of the functionality and how to sort of query the system. Remember, you can set a breakpoint and you can just PO the actual app to sort of see what's available. You'll see buttons, you'll see static text. There's other attributes that we can see that when we're working with this, and you can click and interact with those. There's a lot of APIs. Apple has a lot of documentation on this, so I would definitely recommend watching some of their videos so that you can become more proficient. But this was just me sort of playing around with this because I wanted to test these edge cases and I didn't have a good way to do it. And so we learned how to write some helper methods that allow you to either wait for additional time, tap nearby an element, or wait for something to disappear. And now in Xcode 16, if you're playing around with Xcode 16 like I am, you are able to use some of these newer APIs like the waits for non-existence. And so you can start leveraging that in your code. Hey, thanks for watching. And if you want to get more tutorials like this one, you can subscribe. My next video is going to be on working with SwiftUI and specifically with how you can work with your different data models. So I'll be showing the new observation framework, which was new in iOS 17, that is going to allow you to connect your data models to your SwiftUI views. And we'll be working with bindable attributes using text fields. And I'll show you how to lay out the UI and then how to stylize the UI. If you want to see more videos like this, comment down below in the comments. And then if you want to get access to any of the source code, you can click the link down below to download my source code so that you can start the tutorial from my starting point or so that you can get the final solution code. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.